there are things women will never tell you directly about attraction, not because they're necessarily trying to deceive you, but because attraction doesn't always operate on the level of conscious thought. A woman can tell you she wants one thing, genuinely believe that she wants it, and yet feel something completely different when she encounters a man who has certain qualities. And this is where a lot of men become confused. They listen to what a woman says. They try to give her exactly what she says she wants. They become more available. They become nicer. They text more. They try harder to impress her. And somehow, the harder they try, the less attraction they create. Why? Because attraction is not a mathematical equation. You can't simply give someone more attention and expect more desire in return. There's something happening underneath. There is a psychological world that people don't always understand about themselves. And if you want to understand attraction, you have to become sensitive to that invisible world. So let me give you 7 psychological secrets that explain why attraction often works in ways that men don't expect. The first is this: women are often more attracted to how you make them feel than to what you say you are. That sounds obvious, but most men completely misunderstand it. A man will think, I need to tell her I'm confident, so he talks about his achievements. He tells her how successful he is. He explains what he does. He tries to prove that he's interesting, but confidence that has to be announced is usually not very convincing. You can feel when somebody is trying to convince you of something, and this is true in every area of human behavior. If somebody keeps telling you they're powerful, you start wondering why they need to tell you. If somebody keeps telling you they're intelligent, you start watching how they behave. And if a man keeps trying to convince a woman that he's attractive, she begins to feel the insecurity underneath the performance. Real confidence doesn't need an advertisement. It's visible in how you carry yourself. It's visible in how you respond when something doesn't go your way. It's visible in whether you desperately need approval. And that's important because attraction is extremely sensitive to emotional signals. A woman may not consciously say, this man has a strong internal sense of self, but she can feel it. She can feel whether you're comfortable in your own skin. She can feel whether you're trying to win her approval. She can feel whether you're waiting for her to validate you. And that's why one of the biggest mistakes a man can make is making a woman the center of his psychological world. Because the moment your entire emotional state depends on whether she likes you, something changes. You're no longer simply interacting with her. You're performing for her, and people can feel performance. The second secret is that mystery creates psychological space. When you reveal everything about yourself immediately, there is nothing left for the other person to discover. And human beings are naturally curious. Think about the first time you meet somebody, you don't know their entire history. You don't know what they think. You don't know what they are capable of. You don't know what their weaknesses are. You don't know what their private world looks like. There is uncertainty, and uncertainty creates attention. Now, this does not mean playing childish games. It doesn't mean deliberately ignoring someone or pretending to be unavailable. That's not mystery. That's manipulation. Real mystery comes from having a life that doesn't revolve around explaining yourself to another person. You don't feel the need to immediately reveal everything. You don't feel the need to fill every silence. You don't feel the need to constantly prove your interest. You allow someone to gradually discover you. And there's a deeper psychological principle here. People participate more emotionally in something they have helped discover. If I tell you everything about myself, you're simply receiving information. But if you gradually discover different sides of me, your imagination becomes involved. And imagination can be much more powerful than information. The third secret is that excessive availability can destroy the very attraction you're trying to create. This is one of the hardest things for people to understand because being available sounds like a good thing. If you like someone, why wouldn't you respond immediately? Why wouldn't you always make time? Why wouldn't you constantly show interest? Because there is a difference between being interested and being psychologically dependent. A man with his own life can be deeply interested in a woman without abandoning himself for her. He has work, he has ambitions, he has friendships. He has interests, he has things that occupy his mind, and when he spends time with her, he's choosing to be there. He's not desperately waiting for her to give his life meaning. That's a completely different emotional signal. And again, the woman may not consciously analyze this. She may not think, this man has maintained healthy boundaries and therefore I'm attracted to him. She simply experiences the difference. One man feels like he's trying to get something from her. Another man feels like he's inviting her into a life that already exists. That distinction is enormous. The fourth secret is that women often test emotional stability without consciously thinking of it as a test. Now, when I say test, I don't mean some deliberate psychological game where every woman is secretly trying to manipulate a man. Human beings naturally test the people around them. We observe how they react. We push against boundaries. We create small moments of uncertainty, and we watch because behavior under pressure tells us more than behavior under perfect circumstances. Anybody can appear confident when everything is going their way. The real question is, what happens when something doesn't? What happens when she disagrees with you? What happens when she doesn't reply? What happens when she changes her mind? What happens when she teases you? What happens when she challenges something you say? A fragile man immediately reacts. He becomes defensive. He becomes angry. He starts over explaining. He tries to regain control. But a psychologically grounded man doesn't need to win every moment. He can remain calm. He can disagree without becoming hostile. He can accept rejection without collapsing. He can hear criticism without feeling that his identity has been attacked. And that reveals character. This is actually one of the deeper principles in the reference material. Strong character reveals itself under stress, while weak character becomes defensive and reactive when pressure arrives. The fifth secret is that attraction is often connected to emotional contrast. If every interaction feels exactly the same, the emotional experience becomes flat. Think about music. If every note had exactly the same intensity, there would be no melody. There has to be movement. There has to be tension and release. Conversation works in a similar way. You joke, then you become serious. You tease, then you listen. You reveal something personal, then you move back into lighter conversation. There is movement between closeness and independence. And this is why trying too hard to create a perfect interaction can actually make the interaction lifeless. 2. Some men become so focused on saying the right thing that they stop being present. They're constantly monitoring themselves. Did she like that? Wow, that's that funny. Should I text her now? Did I say too much? And suddenly they're no longer experiencing the woman. They're studying her reaction to themselves. That's anxiety disguised as strategy. And the irony is that the more you obsess over controlling the emotional outcome, the less natural you become. Attraction requires a certain amount of uncertainty. You cannot control another person's feelings, and the stronger you become psychologically, the more comfortable you become with that fact. The sixth secret is that people are often attracted to qualities they don't consciously know how to explain. This is where attraction becomes complicated. You might meet someone who looks perfect on paper. They're kind, they're intelligent, they're attractive, they're successful, they seem compatible with you, and yet there is no emotional charge. Then you meet somebody else who doesn't seem as logical. Maybe they challenge you, maybe they're unpredictable, maybe they have a quality you can't quite describe, and suddenly there's energy. Why? Because attraction doesn't simply respond to a checklist. It responds to emotional associations. Your past experiences influence what feels familiar. Your insecurities influence what feels exciting. Your childhood influences what you interpret as love. And sometimes people are attracted to patterns that aren't actually good for them. This is one of the darker truths of human psychology. We don't always choose what is healthy. Sometimes we choose what is familiar. Familiar can feel like chemistry. A person may say, I don't know why I'm so attracted to this person. But if you look deeper, there may be a pattern. They're repeating an emotional dynamic they've experienced before. They're trying to solve an old wound through a new relationship. They're chasing something that feels familiar, even though it repeatedly hurts them. This is why understanding attraction requires understanding yourself. Because if you don't understand your own psychological patterns, you'll mistake intensity for compatibility. You'll mistake anxiety for chemistry. You'll mistake uncertainty for passion. And you'll keep choosing the same emotional experience with different people. The seventh secret is perhaps the most important. The strongest attraction happens when you stop trying to be attractive. Now, that sounds contradictory, but think about what happens when you stop needing to impress somebody. You become more honest. You become more relaxed. You stop rehearsing every sentence. You stop monitoring every reaction. You stop changing your personality to match what you think she wants. And something interesting happens. You become more yourself, and authenticity has a psychological power that performance doesn't. Because when somebody is comfortable enough to be themselves, there is a sense of solidity. They're not asking you to tell them who they are. They already know, or at least they're trying to discover it. And that's ultimately what makes a person compelling. Not perfection, not having the perfect body, not knowing every seductive line, not having some secret technique that makes women chase you. It's having an internal world that is larger than the person's approval. Because if you need someone to desire you in order to feel desirable, you're giving them enormous psychological power over you. And the moment you give another person that kind of power, you become reactive. They move closer, you feel good. They move away, you panic. They text you, you're happy. They don't text you, you start questioning yourself. And now your emotional state is being controlled by somebody else's behavior. That's not attraction, that's dependency. Real strength is different. You can desire someone without needing them. You can enjoy their attention without becoming addicted to it. You can pursue someone without abandoning your dignity. And you can walk away when the relationship doesn't serve either person. That's why the deepest lesson about attraction isn't really about women. It's about human nature. People are constantly responding to emotional signals that they themselves don't completely understand. We tell ourselves stories about why we like someone. We say they're beautiful, they're intelligent, they're funny, they're successful. But underneath those explanations are memories, associations, fears, desires, fantasies, and unconscious patterns. And if you understand that, you stop looking at attraction as a game of tricks. You start looking at it as psychology. You become more observant. You pay attention to how people behave rather than simply what they say. You notice how someone treats you when they don't need anything from you. You notice how they behave when they're under pressure. You notice whether their attention feels genuine or calculated. You notice whether you're attracted to the person in front of you or to some fantasy you've created around them. And perhaps most importantly, you begin observing yourself. Why do I want this person? Why does their approval matter so much to me? Why am I afraid of losing them when I barely know them? Why do I become more interested when they become distant? Why do I feel less attracted when someone treats me well? Those questions can reveal more about your psychology than any dating trick ever could, because once you understand your own patterns, you become much harder to manipulate, and you become much less desperate to manipulate other people. You don't need to chase every person who gives you attention. You don't need to convince someone to desire you. You don't need to perform a personality that isn't yours. You simply become more conscious. And consciousness changes everything, because the person who understands attraction isn't the person who knows the most tricks. It's the person who understands human nature deeply enough to recognize what is happening beneath the surface. And once you can see beneath the surface, you stop being controlled by the psychology you once couldn't see. There is another side to attraction that most people don't talk about, and it's probably one of the most uncomfortable things for a man to understand. Sometimes the more you want someone, the less attractive you become to them. Not because desire is bad, desire is natural, but there is a difference between wanting someone and needing something from them. And women, like human beings in general, are extremely sensitive to that difference. You can say all the right words. You can act confident. You can dress well. You can know exactly what to say. But if underneath all of that you're thinking, please like me, please choose me, please don't leave, that emotional signal can leak through everything you do. You may not say it, but your behavior says it for you. You answer too quickly, you agree too easily, you abandon your plans, you become excessively agreeable. You tolerate things you normally wouldn't tolerate, and eventually the other person begins to feel that something is missing. Not necessarily because you're a bad person, but because you're no longer standing on your own psychological ground. You're standing on hers. And that's where attraction can begin to disappear. There's a strange paradox in human psychology. We often value things more when we know we cannot completely possess them. Think about attention. If somebody gives you unlimited attention from the beginning, you eventually stop noticing it. But if someone has a full life and gives you their attention deliberately, that attention feels different. It feels valuable. Why? Because it costs them something. They're choosing to give it. They're not emotionally dependent on giving it. And that distinction matters. This brings us to another psychological secret. A woman doesn't necessarily want a man who is emotionally unavailable, but she can be attracted to a man who is emotionally self-sufficient. Those are not the same thing. An emotionally unavailable man runs away from intimacy. A self-sufficient man can experience intimacy without losing himself. He can care deeply without becoming desperate. He can love someone without making them responsible for his identity, and that's a powerful distinction. Because when you don't need somebody to complete you, you can actually see them more clearly. You can appreciate who they really are instead of turning them into a fantasy. And this is where many relationships go wrong. People don't fall in love with the person. They fall in love with the psychological story they've created about the person. They see a few qualities. Then the imagination takes over. She's different. She's the one. I've never felt this way. And suddenly they've created an entire relationship in their mind before the other person has even had a chance to reveal who they are. That's dangerous because once you become attached to the fantasy, reality becomes disappointing. You don't want to know who she actually is. You want her to remain the person you imagined. And that's not love, that's projection. One of the most important things you can learn about attraction is to separate observation from fantasy. What do I actually know about this person? How do they treat people? How do they handle stress? How do they behave when they don't get what they want? How do they treat people who have nothing to offer them? What happens when they're angry? What happens when they're bored? What happens when they have power? These things tell you far more than chemistry, because chemistry tells you how you feel around somebody. Character tells you who they actually are. And if you don't understand the difference, you can become addicted to people who are completely wrong for you. There's another psychological secret here. Sometimes the person who gives you the strongest emotional reaction isn't the person you're most compatible with. They're simply the person who activates something inside you, maybe insecurity, maybe competition, maybe the fear of rejection, maybe the desire to prove yourself. And this is why some men become obsessed with women who barely give them attention. The woman becomes a psychological challenge. Now it's no longer, do I actually like her? It's, can I make her like me? And that's a completely different question. The first question is about compatibility. The second is about ego. And ego can become incredibly persistent. A man gets rejected, and instead of thinking, maybe we're not right for each other, he thinks, I need to prove that she made a mistake. And now he's no longer pursuing a relationship. He's pursuing validation. And validation is an endless game because even if you eventually get her attention, you haven't solved the original problem. You still need her attention to feel valuable. So the cycle continues. This is why one of the strongest forms of attraction is indifference to outcome, not indifference to the person, indifference to the outcome. You can want her, you can pursue her, you can be interested, but you don't need to control what happens. If she likes you, wonderful. If she doesn't, you continue living. That creates a psychological freedom that people can feel. And there's something else that happens when you stop trying to control the outcome. You become more honest. You can disagree. You can express your real opinions. You can say no. You can walk away. You can flirt without calculating every reaction. You can listen without constantly preparing your next sentence. You become present. And presence is underrated. Most people aren't really listening. They're waiting for their turn to speak. They're thinking about how they're being perceived. They're wondering whether the other person likes them. They're performing. But when somebody is genuinely present with you, you feel it. They aren't trying to extract something from the interaction. They're actually experiencing it. And that creates a different kind of connection. There's a reason charismatic people often seem effortless. It's not necessarily because they have some magical ability. Often they're simply less trapped inside their own heads. They're not constantly monitoring themselves, they're paying attention to you. And when you pay attention to another person without needing anything from them, something powerful happens. They feel seen, and human beings crave that. But here's where it becomes complicated. You cannot fake genuine presence forever. Eventually, your underlying psychology peers. If you're deeply insecure, eventually the insecurity leaks through. If you're desperate for approval, eventually the need for approval becomes visible. If you're pretending to be confident, eventually pressure exposes the performance. This is why working on your character is much more powerful than memorizing attraction techniques, because techniques can control a moment. Character controls patterns. And women don't experience you in one isolated moment, they experience your patterns. How you respond when you're tired, how you respond when you're frustrated, how you treat people beneath you, how you behave when you lose, how you behave when you win, how you behave when nobody is watching. That's where your real personality lives. And there's another thing men often misunderstand. They think attraction is about becoming the most impressive man in the room. But attraction isn't always about being impressive. Sometimes it's about being distinct. There's a difference. An impressive man may have money, status, looks, accomplishments. But a distinct man has something that feels uniquely his way of thinking, his humor, his worldview, his interests, his standards, his way of moving through the world. He's not trying to become what everybody wants. He's becoming more clearly himself. And that's rare because most people are unconsciously adjusting themselves to fit the environment. They say what everyone else says. They like what everyone else likes. They adopt the opinions of the people around them. They become predictable. And predictability isn't necessarily bad, but psychological individuality creates intrigue. You don't need to be strange. You don't need to be arrogant. You simply need to have an inner world, something you're deeply interested in, something you're building, something you're learning, something you're pursuing that has nothing to do with getting attention from women. Because when your life has meaning outside of romance, romance becomes a part of your life rather than the purpose of it. And that's when your behavior changes. You stop asking, how can I make her attracted to me? And you start asking, do we actually bring something valuable into each other's lives? That's a much stronger position because now you're evaluating as well. You're not sitting there hoping to be chosen. You're also choosing. And that doesn't mean pretending to be superior. It means remembering that attraction is mutual. You have standards too. You have values too. You have boundaries too. And you should be paying attention to whether the person you're attracted to is actually good for you. This is particularly important because attraction can make intelligent people irrational. You can know that someone is toxic. You can recognize the warning signs. You can see the pattern and still want them. That's the power of emotional attraction. Your rational mind can say, walk away. But another part of you says, but I want them. And that internal conflict can become incredibly addictive. Sometimes people don't want peace. They want intensity. They confuse emotional chaos with passion. They confuse jealousy with love. They confuse obsession with connection. They confuse uncertainty with excitement. And if you don't understand yourself, you can spend years repeating the same pattern. Different person, same story, different relationship, same emotional outcome. That's why the deepest form of attraction psychology is actually self-knowledge. You need to understand what pulls you, what makes you chase, what makes you withdraw, what kind of person triggers your insecurity, what kind of attention makes you feel powerful, what kind of rejection makes you obsessive, because those reactions reveal your psychological weak points, and everyone has them. Even the strongest person has something. There is always some emotional button that can be pushed The goal isn't to become a person who has no weaknesses. That's impossible. The goal is to become aware of them because what you don't understand controls you. And what you understand, you can begin to manage. This is also why you should be careful about becoming obsessed with psychological tricks. The man who spends all his time learning how to manipulate attraction may actually be revealing his own insecurity. He's searching for certainty. He wants a formula. He wants to know exactly what to say, exactly when to text, exactly when to pull away, exactly how long to wait. But human beings aren't machines. There is no perfect formula. And the more you try to reduce attraction to a formula, the more you miss the actual human being standing in front of you. The better approach is observation, watch, listen, pay attention, notice patterns, and most importantly, notice yourself, because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't choosing the wrong woman. It's becoming the wrong version of yourself around her. You become needy, you become jealous, you become controlling, you become afraid. You stop doing the things that made you interesting in the first place. You abandon your own identity because you're afraid that if you remain yourself, she'll leave. And ironically, that's often when you become least attractive because attraction cannot survive indefinitely when one person disappears inside the relationship. You need two individuals, not one person chasing and another person deciding, two people, two lives, two minds, two worlds coming together by choice. And that's ultimately the deepest psychological secret. You don't create attraction by trying to control another person's emotions. You create the conditions where attraction can naturally exist: confidence without arrogance, interest without desperation, mystery without manipulation, attention without dependency, desire without obsession, boundaries without hostility, and a life that remains meaningful whether someone chooses you or not. Because when you reach that point, something changes. You stop chasing validation. You stop begging to be understood. You stop performing. You stop trying to become irresistible. And you become much more interested in becoming real. And ironically, that's often when people become most compelling. Because the person who doesn't desperately need to be chosen is psychologically free. And freedom is one of the most attractive qualities a human being can possess.